What up, y'all? It's like 10:30 and I'm just rolling out of bed, but just want to give you a quick update. I got some hot water in a spray bottle, and I am using some cheap conditioner. This is like a pre-poo, I guess. I took my braids out last night. It took like 5.5 hours to take everything out. I basically just went like parted off sections and took the braids out, and then when I was done taking them out, I would just braid it up. I did finger detangling when I was taking the braids out, just to get any loose hairs, any like build up from the gel. If any of that was in my hair, I just gently pulled all of that out as I was going along. So I'm just going to take down the sections that I braided up. And then I'm going to spray them down with the water and my Glop conditioner in there. So that's way too much for this section, but that's what I'm doing. It's just glopping it in there. I'm focusing on the roots because that's where any buildup, and that's where most of the tangles would be at that I'm worried about. You can see now this hair slipping out. It's loosening those shed hairs, so you can see it's gathering up at the ends, and this just lets me kind of pull that out, loosen it up so it doesn't break my hair off when I get in the shower. And then also the good thing about doing this ahead of time too is that all of this would be in my shower if I waited to do this in the shower. So this just keeps some of that stuff out of my drain. I'm gonna take some time, go through each one of these sections. Like even this now is tangling because there's shed here and here that just wants to come out. Oh, that's really in there. I'm gonna have to fight that out. Oh wait, there it goes. So sometimes you just pull it out from one side, and then it'll usually loosen up. Okay. All right. So now I'm looking like we're gonna cover that shed here. Coming loose. All right. And so it's coming out. So after I just kind of run my fingers through it, I'm kind of smoothing over it. That's the way I finger detangle. I smooth over it, and then I kind of push my thumb through it as I'm smoothing it. I'll feel like this feels like there's a knot on the end, so I know that there's a piece of hair kind of tangled in there. So I'll just try to like pull it loose in order to get that hair to release. Sometimes though, when you pull it loose, you find that it's a fairy knot on the end, or it's, you know, a little tangle there, so you might just take the scissors to that. You're not gonna be able to see that little tangle. Can you see that little tangle right there? It's like a fairy knot right there. I'll do this with a pair of scissors and just snap it off, cut it off right there, so I'm not snapping it. I'm not gonna show y'all my whole head. I just wanted to show you the gist of what I'm doing, because this is most likely going to be the process in between all of my braids. All right, try not to panic, but I feel like I'm on a time crunch. I just got done washing. Get ready to blow dry. I am going to use this to blow dry my hair. This is the keratin green tea reconstructor or whatever. It's like protein for heat. What did I do? I washed my hair with the blueberry curls, blueberry bliss, whatever. Wash, and did not deep condition. I did not regular condition. I'm gonna keep it moving. It'll be fine. My hair doesn't feel rough or dry. Today is New Year's Eve. It's like 1:45. And I still gotta get my braids in. It's not so much that like I'm on a deadline or anything, but I think I was more thinking like I think I was imagining braiding my hair on New Year's Day, not on New Year's Eve. And even though I'm not going anywhere to celebrate the new year, I still want to like sit on my couch and listen to music and like drink and wait for the new year to come in. I don't want to be braiding my hair for the new year, so that's where I'm messing up. Alright, so onto the hair store, turn it back. So I use this yarn spool holder to hold the hair. I just drape that over my towel bar. The hair that I bought is the Spectra Braid 3X, so it's got 3 bundles in each pack, and it's pre-stretched and it's a 26-inch length. I bought 1 pack in the number 30 and 1 pack in the number 27, but I did have leftover 30 from my last braids. I had just as much left over when I was done with this style, and I had a whole bundle of the 27 left as well. This is just showing you how I separate the hair off. When I did it, I did thinner sections on one row and then did thicker sections on the next row. What I would suggest though is just make your hair consistent all the way through. Your braid is going to be more consistent if you're feeding in the same size pieces all the way through instead of trying to grab thicker sections. So you'll see how I mess up on this as we go along. I use the Shine Jam Extra Hold. I have a couple of different clips. I have a few different combs. I have a wide tooth comb for detangling, a rat tail comb for parting, and then a fine tooth rat tail comb for detail parting. I have my scissors on hand. I have some scrunchies and hair elastics. That is not a COVID cough. I take my earrings out so they're not in the way. And I also have contacts in. That's another tip, just so your glasses aren't in the way. So parting can be difficult when you're doing your own hair. So I'm showing you what I do. I kind of find a point on one side of my head, stick the comb there, and you can't see it, but on the other side, I stick my finger in that same point. And then I just follow the comb over until I meet my finger on the other side. Now, I want to make sure that I get this hair out of the way, but it's in a loose ponytail so that I can finish up the part and clean it up a little bit better. Just going back through that. Now I'm holding the mirror. Before I was doing it blindly. Now I'm taking some gel and I'm smoothing that over the part. What this does is it helps to lay the hairs down so that I can pull a clean part. So I come back in with the fine tooth comb and I comb all of those hairs down into their respective sections. And then I take the tail of that comb and I look like I'm jabbing myself in the scalp, but I'm like using it to go underneath the hairs that have been smoothed down so that I can pull a clean part. Now you'll notice as I do this, I lay the metal tip of the comb down on my scalp because I can feel the metal on my bare scalp. And I use that to create a straight line, and I'm kind of turning my head, trying to keep the comb steady and turning my head in order to pull the clean part. So that's another tip for how you can make your part straight on yourself. Sometimes the best way to make the straight part is not to move your hand with the comb in it, but instead just hold the comb steady and move your head in a circle instead. And then just allow the gel to smooth the sections down for you and just go back to your mirror to make sure it's straight. Now on these back sections, I didn't even bother with the comb at first. I just used my finger to create like a temporary part. And I'm also using my mouth as a temporary clip. You can easily hold those sections up with a clip. But I come back over those temporary parts with the gel, use that to slick those sides down, and then I come back in with the comb to define those parts. And then of course, repeat the same process on the other side. Now I am standing in front of the big mirror in the bathroom, and I am using a small handheld mirror to see my reflection so that I can see the back of my head as I'm parting. And that's how I'm able to guide the fine tooth of this, or the fine tail of this comb, to define my part. So here I'm just clipping off 2 of the sections that I just pre-parted, and I'm going to start on this middle section first. So I go back and define the part a little bit better at the top now that I have those 2 pieces out of the way. And what I want to do is gel down this section to prep it for the braiding. So I'm just going back over the sections, need a little bit more gel. I'm going to smooth that out, but what I want to do is I want to pinch the hair towards the middle of the section, because we don't want to have a braid that's hanging towards the bottom like a little ponytail. We want the braid to come out of the middle of this jumbo section. Now I'm going to show you this braid I end up taking out. So I'm kind of showing you the wrong way, but I want you to see why it's the wrong way. So first off, this section I parted off into 3 pieces side by side. I feed the braid in on the 1 and 2, then I braid over for 3. Then I feed it in again on 3 and 1, braid over for 2. If you pay attention to what I'm doing, basically I'm putting the legs in. If you have 3 strands, I'm feeding in on the first strand and the second strand, and then I'm picking it up again on the 3rd strand. So it's a weird way that I'm feeding in, but if you pay attention to the rhythm of how I'm feeding this in, this is actually not the way I learned how to do feed-in braids. So it feels very uncomfortable to me. I don't know why I started off doing it this way. I think I may have watched too many YouTube videos before I started my hair and I saw somebody gripping like this. This is not the way I learned how to do feed-ins. So the braid actually ends up feeling a little janky, and you can see that I'm like grabbing massive chunks of hair right there. I just pulled 2 pieces off and added them in. So I'm adding a whole lot of hair at one time instead of feeding it in gradually. And it's just making the braid very jumbled and lopsided and inconsistent as I go down, because I'm adding way too much hair all at once. This is just too much hair altogether, really. It's way too jumbo of a braid. And when I change my hand motion, that's when I can really feel that it's wrong. So I take that braid all the way out. Well, not all the way out. I take part of the braid out that I had just added on, and I try to just go back and fix it. But when I switch my hand motion to that folding braid, that's really where I could feel that the braid feels lopsided and wonky, but I just try to continue on. So here you can see the braid looks goofy. So I start differently on this section. This is the second braid. I've started 1, 2 on the braids, and now I'm feeding in. You see I cross over twice and then feed the other tail in, but I also bring in my next feed in on that same section. So it's like 1, 2, grab the tail on 3. Feed in the next tail, 1, 2, grab that tail on 3. Feed in the next tail, 1, 2, grab the tail on 3. So that's the way I actually learned how to do feed-ins. This is the part that feels comfortable to me. For some reason, I had to stand up in order to remember how to do my feed-in braids. So the angle is pretty bad on that. Sorry about that. This hair is everywhere. It's like straight out of Barbie's head. It is super wispy and thin. But you know, I try to manage it as I go along. You can see I'm like blowing it off my arm. It's everywhere. It feels like spider webs. It's so thin and wispy. But anyway, and the blonde seemed way more thin. The number 27 seemed way thinner and way silkier than the 30 did. But I still try to get it through. Just because it's silky doesn't mean that I can't blend my hair into it. I just have to gel my hair and comb it through. And then I kind of fold the hair over top of my hair to try to tuck it as much as possible. We can see at the roots that it's not tucked, but as I go down the braid, I'm able to tuck my hair in pretty well through there. So even though the hair is thin and wispy and silky, you can still kind of. So you can see as I go down the braid, if it starts to feel funny, I borrow from sections as I need to in order to keep the sections consistent. And then you also see that when I work my way down the braid, I end up changing my hand position. It's also important that you detangle this hair as you go along because that can mess your braid up. But I changed my hand position to this folding technique because that just helps me to make the braid smooth and consistent all the way down. It's something about braiding in this fashion that it seems like I can fold the braid into a uniform thickness differently than if I do it the other way. But you can see even with that folding technique that I can still borrow strands from the other side if I need to keep the strand consistent. So I don't braid this all the way to the very end. I'm just trying to get the braid in, so I'll leave the ends loose. Here you can see I am revisiting the second braid, or the first braid I should say, and I am undoing that, and I do end up redoing this entire braid. And here I'm showing how I changed my parting. Instead of doing 3 side-by-side sections, I kind of take a bottom section and then 2 at the top. And I'm pulling that bottom section up towards the middle. And again, this is helping me to pinch the hair in the middle of the section instead of pulling downward and making it come down like a ponytail in this very thick parting section. You can see I'm going back to the 1 and 3 method with feeding in, but even on this braid, I still grabbed some thick, chunky sections, and so I still was messing up early. Again, my tip to you is just to make sure that your pieces are consistent, and if you feed in like 6 consistent size pieces all the way through, it'll make your braid thick as you go along, as opposed to trying to feed in like 3 small pieces and 3 chunky pieces. It's just going to make the braid too fat, and it's going to make the braid inconsistent as well. But yeah, as you go down the braid, you want to comb your hair so that you're keeping that smooth. And then you also want to comb through the braiding hair towards the end as you kind of weave the hair over for your braids. You're going to notice that it tries to tangle up at the end. So you just want to kind of keep pulling through it to detangle it, and also run the wide tooth comb through it a couple of times just in case there's any hairs that are trying to pull out. You won't have to worry about creating knots. And this is just showing again how I do the folding technique, but I am comparing the size of the braids as I go along so that I can try to make them consistent and try to come up with, you know, the thickness that I want all these braids to be. Again, once you decide on the thickness that works best, I would say keep that number in mind. If it's 6 pieces that you feed in, you want to keep them 6 consistent pieces, and you want to do that on all the braids so that they come out consistent. But you can see now that I redid that second one, or the first braid I should say, they definitely are laying more uniform and they don't look as lopsided. So we're just going to repeat all of those steps for the third section as well. You can see I did the parting the same way, and then I am also feeding in the braids again on 1 and 3. So when it was all said and done, I ended up redoing those first 3 braids, I believe twice each. And there were a couple of braids throughout my head that I started off installing them, and then I just didn't like the way it felt, so I pulled it all down and redid it. So that definitely added some time to my braiding process. So again, keeping in mind those tips about the consistency of your sizes and also your method for feeding in the braids, that's going to help you out so that you don't have to repeat any braids, because that's just making the project or making the install even longer than what it needs. And then of course, if you notice any wispy random hairs pulling, you just want to grab the scissors and pull those out, of course hoping it's not your hair, it's the braiding hair. So my base row is done. The part is still a little crooked, but I'm lifting up the braids just to show you they're knotless, so I can easily pull them up in a ponytail. It doesn't hurt, there's no tension. So when I go to do my next row of parting, I kind of part ear to ear, like in an arch fashion up over my head. And then I come around to the front just to find my center part to section that off as well. Initially, I was thinking I was going to do a center part for the front, but it ended up turning out to not be that way. So I do the same thing with the parting on the second row. I kind of find my spot on one side and kind of draw the imaginary line across to the other side. This time I am holding the mirror, so I didn't even pull the part all the way across before I had to come back and fix it. But I'm going back with the gel to define the part with the thin comb as well. And if you need to do this section by section, that's perfectly fine. Most times I cannot pull a straight part just going straight across. On my second row, I want my parts to be brick laid. So I am drawing a center part down the middle so that I can do 4 sections on this row to lay on top of the 3 from the previous row. So all of my parts are going to be lined up on top of the middle of the section below it, so none of my parts should fall in a straight line. This is especially important with jumbo braids because you want the braids to fall in between each other so that you don't have as much spacing. You already have these large parts, but if all of the braids are lying in a straight line, all you're going to see is scalp. So bricklaying my parts is going to help the braids to lay in between each other so that I can get a flat style and it's not as bulky. Now, after I complete some of the braids in the back, I wanted to carry this part over to the front. And this is where we hit my problem areas. So you can see in the front of my hair, I have this section that is very thin. Here I'm tapping just to show you that it's like slick bald in that spot. So what I want to do is I want to cover it up, but at the same time, I don't want to create a lot of tension. This spot is not really on my edge. It's like further inland, But at the same time, what ends up happening is that if I try to pull my edges over it to cover it, then I will break my edges off. So it makes the edges very fragile because there's nothing directly behind them to back it. I have to be careful with how I pull this hair. So what I want to do is I want to pinch my braid closer to the front. And you can see there that I smooth the hair out, but I want to pinch as close as possible to the front edge. What that does is it puts the tension on the back of the part instead of on the front. So instead of me pulling my thin edges backwards, I'm pulling the stronger portion forward. And then I just do my feed ends that way. So then as I continue down the braid, you'll notice that my hand is actually resting on the side of my head. That is another method that I'm using to not pull on this section. I want to add the braids in, but I don't want to yank the roots outward as I'm feeding the braids in. So I'm keeping my hand on my head the whole time that I'm feeding the braids in. And that enables me to add in the hair and work my way down the braid without yanking on the roots. This is another reason why I like to do my hair at home, because again, I can pay careful attention to how this feels in my head instead of just, doing it the way I see that. When you're doing someone else's hair, you can't feel how you're pulling. You can kind of see it a little bit, but you can't really feel it. And if there's thin hairs there that are being pulled, I would feel that differently than what you would actually be able to see if you were braiding. So even as I work my way down the braid, I'm not pulling on it. I'm kind of lifting up almost as I work my way down so that I'm not creating tension on the root. So I'm following that part from the back around the side to the other side as well. And you'll see that I have a problem area on this side as well, but it's slightly different as far as the placement. So this one is a lot closer to the edge, but it's not quite as big as the other one. It still is slick bald, but it's a lot closer to the edge. So I finished that braid from the back, but when I come back around to this side, my method for dealing with this problem area is a little bit different than the other side. And what I do here, because it's just a smaller patch, I kind of do like baby hairs almost to just kind of smooth over it and try to hide it. It doesn't really hide it, but it does camouflage it a little bit. Like I said, just because this one is closer to the edge, it's not really a lot to pull over it. And I still want to be focused the same way. I do not want to create a whole bunch of tension on my edge trying to smooth over this bald spot. It's not that serious. It's there. We just want to kind of hide it. So I'm smoothing just the same, but again, I want to come back and make sure that I'm not smoothing so far back that I'm creating tension on my edges. So you'll see here when I go to grip, you can see I pull the second section forward, okay? And then I smooth that hair backwards. So everything from the back is pulling towards the front. And you can see that where the braid ends up is in front of my ear. And that's just another way that I'm trying to make sure that I place it so that it's sitting closer to my edge. Sorry for the bad angles again, you guys, but hopefully you can make out what I'm doing as far as feeding in the hair. And again, you can see this Barbie hair again. It's wispy and it's all over the place. So we just try our best to control it. Again, you just want to make sure that you comb your hair down to smooth it through. That's another way to make sure that you're not creating snags. And you can see here, like I'm lifting up as I'm braiding because I'm like trying not to yank down on that section and create tension on that part. I want to keep this as gentle as possible on those edges. So now coming around to the front in order to line up my next row. So I start by parting this off in the front on one side, and then I kind of turn my head in order to follow that part around the back. Clean it up a little bit. And then I stick my finger on the part in the back and follow the comb towards that in order to match up the part from the back. And here I'm kind of taking a look over my head and noticing that I probably don't have enough space for a middle part. But I just come back around the back and fix that part a little bit more in the back so that I can start my second row. Again, sorry, this is the third row. But again, I'm bricklaying my parts. And in the front, again, what I'm doing is going back to that section where the problem area is. You can see on this side that now it's underneath the braid. So I'm doing my same method as far as kind of smoothing over the baby hairs in order to cover it. You can see some of the gel I'm using is thicker. This is from a old bottle or old jar of Shine and Jam that was kind of dry. So the texture is a little bit thicker than what it is on the brand new jar of Shine and Jam where it's more runny. So I'm not using a different edge control there. That's just old, thick Shine and Jam. But I'm doing the same method as far as the baby hair smoothing technique. And then I'm going to focus the same way when I pull my parts for this braid. I'm going to make sure that I am pinching closer towards the front. And I want this braid to fall in front of the braid that I did underneath it, because that is another way to hide the thin section, is by laying the actual braid over top of the thin sections. So here I am finished with the third row, and I did not show you the braid on the other side with the other problem section, but I just kind of wanted to slow-mo and show you how I did it. Again, just making sure that I'm focusing the braid towards the front and making sure that that braid lays in front of the braid below it, so that it kind of lays over top of the problem section, and that way you're not just staring directly at this bald spot. So starting off the part for row 4, I kind of picked the part on the side and followed that part across from one side to the other. But that's just the preliminary part, because I'm really just trying to section off the top of my head. There's going to be 2 braids in the back at the very top, and I just want to kind of create the initial part for that section. But you can see it's pointed, it's not straight. I'm going to come back and fix it. But I want to come back around to the front and create my part here so that I can connect it over. And what I'm doing is, instead of creating a middle part, I will have a middle row. So I'm going to have a side part on this style. And that's going to make it heavy on one side too. Again, that's just going to create more coverage for my thin areas. So that's just the way I'm going to wear the style. I come back to the back and I part it straight down the middle, so that it lines up again with my brick pattern. I'm going to define that part a little bit. And then here I go back over that side section to create the brick lay again. I kind of extend the part out a little bit more so that it's on top of the section next to it, instead of following that part straight down. I come back around to the front section here and I do the exact same thing. Even though the part is not directly in the middle of the section below it, I do try to offset the parts as much as possible to make a front section and create that brick lay. And then I do the same thing on the other side as far as that back section and extending that over. I come back to the middle section in the front, and I'm gonna have 3 braids on that middle part. So I am just sectioning that off. And here you can see that I actually end up pre-parting, pre-sectioning the whole rest of my head. This is another tip for moving faster through this braid install. I wish I had have just went through my whole head and pre-parted it off. So that is something I'll do next time. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna end up doing jumbos at some point again in 2021. So I'll be doing all these same tips then, but just having everything pre-parted made it super easy to come back through and install the rest of my braids. So you'll see me go ahead and put all the rest of those through as far as the same regular feed-in method. And you can also see here that my braid sections that I'm adding in are a lot more consistent now, instead of being those jumbo pieces that I was trying to feed in before. And so again, on all of those pieces that are on my edges, I'm just making sure to grip the hair close to the edge and pull the hair forward before I start feeding the braids in, so that it's closer towards the perimeter. And that's creating less tension on my edges. And then also you'll see that this braid also is hanging towards the front. So it's going to lay in front of the braid below it. So this is that third braid from the middle part in the front, and I'm actually braiding that more towards the back instead of towards the side. So it's going to create some coverage in the back. But then this middle braid is going to fall towards the side again to create some coverage over that thin section. All right, and finally, this is the last braid here. So that's just the one in the top, right in the front of the middle. And we're kind of braiding that off to the side as well. All right, it's 20 minutes to 12. The braids are in. The ends are not done. Getting ready to give me some wine. Wait for this new year to hit. And I'm gonna braid the ends up. And then I'll be back to do the finishing as far as dipping them. I'm gonna put some beads on the end.